Here's a question nobody asks. Why do they need to? Think about the person in your life who commands every room, who speaks first and loudest, who seems to know the answer before the question is finished. The one who never wavers, never admits doubt, never, not once, seems unsure of whether they belong. We look at that person and feel something, admiration maybe, or inadequacy, or both. But I want to ask a different question about them. Not what they have that I don't. That's the wrong question. The right question is, why do they need to perform this hard? Because here's what psychology has quietly established, and what almost no one in their daily life connects to the people right in front of them. The loudest confidence in any room is often the most fragile thing in it. And this video is about what's underneath it, including, if you're honest with yourself, by the end of this, what might be underneath yours. Before I explain the psychology, I want to describe the internal experience. This is where most people go wrong. They look at the behavior and think they understand it. They don't. So let me tell you what it feels like from the inside. It feels like being always slightly on. Not dramatically. Not in a way you can point to and name. Just a low, persistent alertness. You walk into a room, and before you've said a word, you're already reading it. Who's here? Who matters? How are you landing? You're watching faces for the micro signals that tell you whether you're registering as impressive or ordinary. And you're adjusting, constantly, in real time. You're never fully in a conversation. Part of you is always managing it. And the exhausting part, the part nobody who looks at you from the outside would believe, is that it never fully stops. Not in meetings, obviously. But also not at dinner with friends, not on a first date, not even, sometimes alone. Because you've been performing for so long that the performance has become indistinguishable from personality. You don't know where the armor ends, and you begin. Here's the cruelest part of all of this. The more successful the performance, the more trapped you become. Because now people have built a relationship with the image. They expect it. They admire it. They introduce you as the person who always knows what to do. And the image has to be maintained, because if you put it down now, after all this time, you genuinely don't know who's underneath it. And you're not sure anyone would be interested in that person anyway. So, you keep going, keep pushing, keep filling every silence before it can fill you. And you call it confidence. When what it actually is a very old, very exhausting way of staying safe. Now, let me give you the framework that makes sense of all of this. There are two versions of what looks like confidence. From the outside, they can be almost impossible to tell apart. The first is grounded confidence. It doesn't take up much space. It's comfortable with silence. It can hold a challenge without the temperature in the room changing. It can be genuinely wrong without anything cracking. It doesn't need the last word because the conversation was never a battle to begin with. The second is compensatory confidence. It needs space. It fills silences because silence is dangerous. It over-explains, interrupts, name drops, and pivots every conversation back toward a win. It's not exactly arrogant. It's afraid. Afraid that if the performance pauses for even a moment, something underneath will become visible. Here is the test that separates them. One single situation reveals everything. Watch what happens when someone is mildly challenged. A truly secure person is challenged, and they pause. They consider. Sometimes they change their position. The challenge didn't threaten them, because their identity wasn't riding on the outcome. A compensatory confident person is challenged, and something shifts. The jaw tightens. The voice gets louder or goes very cold. The response becomes a speech. Suddenly, there's an edge where there wasn't one a moment ago. That reaction isn't arrogance. It's fear wearing arrogance as clothing. And here's what makes this so hard to see. The person themselves usually doesn't experience it as fear. They experience it as certainty, as being right, as not suffering fools. The psychological defense is airtight from the inside. It has to be. That's the whole point. This doesn't happen randomly. And it doesn't only happen to people with dramatic histories. Sometimes it's obvious. The kid who grew up in a house where weakness was mocked, where affection was conditional, where you were praised loudly for performing well and treated as invisible when you didn't. That child learns the equation early. Worth equals output. And they spend the rest of their life trying to produce enough output to stay ahead of the equation. But sometimes it's quieter than that. Sometimes it's the child who was simply praised too specifically, too conditionally. You're so smart, you're so talented, not I love you. Not you belong here, no matter what. But you are impressive, which sounds like love but has a hidden clause. Stay impressive. That child grows up understanding that their place in any room is earned by performing in it. They never develop what psychologists call unconditional self-regard, the internal baseline that says your worth doesn't fluctuate based on the last thing you said or whether the right people noticed you. Instead, they develop something that looks like self-regard, high confidence scores on any measurement you'd use, poised, decisive, radiating certainty. Researchers Jennifer Crocker and Laura Park named this pattern contingent self-esteem that's high but unstable, built on conditions. When the conditions are met, success, approval, dominance in the room, the person feels fine. When the conditions aren't met, the floor drops. It's not low self-esteem. It's high self-esteem with a cracked foundation. And the distinction matters enormously, because the behavior that comes out of it doesn't look like insecurity. It looks like the opposite. Here's the thing that should stop you cold. We've been taught that insecurity makes people shrink. It makes them quiet, hesitant, and unable to meet your eyes. And for some people, yes, that's how it appears. But for a large subset of people, particularly high-achieving, high-functioning people, insecurity doesn't produce shrinking. It produces expansion. It makes them louder, more dominant, and more aggressively certain. It makes them work harder, perform more carefully, and fill every possible silence before doubt can move in. The classic understanding of imposter syndrome, first documented by Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes in 1978, describes the experience of believing you're less capable than others perceive you to be, and of living in fear of being found out. We typically picture this as someone who goes small, deflecting compliments, and doubting their own accomplishments. But there's another response to that same internal experience, and it's the opposite. Some people, facing that same bottomless fear of being found out, go large. They preemptively fill the gap between their image and their internal reality, not by shrinking from the image, but by frantically maintaining it. By making sure the image never has a quiet moment, never has a crack, never gives anyone an opening to see through it. The result looks like aggressive, unshakable confidence. The engine is chronic, exhausting self-doubt. These are the people we promote, the people we defer to in meetings. The people we choose as leaders often overrule genuinely grounded people who are simply quieter about what they know. Because we haven't learned to read the function, we only read the performance. Now that you have the internal map, the behaviors become readable. Think about someone who cannot let you be the most competent person in a room. You share something you accomplished. Before you finish the sentence, they have a bigger version of it. You mention somewhere you've been. They've been there too, longer, and they knew people there. You demonstrate expertise. They demonstrate more. It doesn't feel like a conversation. It feels like a competition you never agreed to enter. The interpretation we usually reach for: arrogance, ego. They just love themselves too much. But look at the internal logic. What that behavior actually requires is a belief so painful, it can barely be said directly. If I am not the most impressive person in this room, I am worth nothing in this room. That's not a confident thought. That's a terrified thought running at full speed. Or think about the person who cannot receive feedback without the interaction becoming a crisis. You offer something gentle, carefully worded, clearly not an attack. And yet, they go quiet in a way that fills the room. Or they argue, or they immediately locate a flaw in you, or they go completely absent for 3 days, and you don't know why. What's happening in that moment isn't anger, even though anger is what you see. Underneath the anger is shame. Specifically, the feedback touched something they already privately believed about themselves. It confirmed the thing they've been running from. And they cannot hold it, because a person whose identity depends on performance cannot absorb information that threatens that performance without experiencing it as annihilation. A genuinely secure person can take criticism, feel uncomfortable, and still not have their sense of self shatter around it. The feedback lands as information, not as a verdict on their worth. The insecure, confident person experiences every piece of critical feedback as a verdict. And then there's the behavior that's hardest to name because it looks most like a social skill. Dominating conversation. Not because they love the sound of their own voice, but when they're talking, they're in control. They know what the next sentence is. There's no space for the room to form a judgment about them. The moment they stop, the moment it goes quiet, all of that ambient alertness, that constant room reading, has nothing to anchor itself to. The silence is where the hum gets loud. So they keep going. There's a layer to this that almost nobody discusses. I want to go there. What happens to the relationships of someone whose confidence is a construction? Think about it carefully. The performance is on at dinner. It's on with their oldest friends. It's on, in subtle ways, with their partner. That means even the people closest to them are, in some sense, closest to the image. And the person knows this. They know that people have fallen in love with, become loyal to, or built trust in, a version of them, the version that never wavers, the version that always has the answer. And there is a specific, devastating loneliness in being surrounded by people who love you and realizing that none of them actually know you. That if you showed them the underneath, the uncertainty, the doubt, the years of quietly asking, am I enough here? You don't know what would remain. So you don't show them. And the armor becomes not just what you wear in professional spaces. It becomes the shape of every relationship you have. There's also a cost to the people around them. Because we reward this. Professionally, socially, institutionally, we consistently mistake loudness for competence, certainty for intelligence, and domination for leadership. The person who speaks the most in the meeting gets the most credit, even when the quieter person had the better idea. The person who seems never to doubt themselves gets promoted, even when their certainty is a managed performance. And here's what that does to the genuinely secure people around them. The person who is actually grounded, who can sit with ambiguity, who says I don't know when they don't know, who doesn't need to fill every silence with their own certainty, often reads as less confident, less decisive, less worthy of the room. They pass every test that actually measures psychological health, and they fail every test the room uses to assign status. The most anxious performer in the meeting gets treated as the most capable person in the room. The person with the most intact sense of self watches it happen and can't figure out why the noise keeps getting rewarded over the signal. That is a systemic failure. And until we learn to read function rather than performance, we keep replicating it. I want to ask you something directly. Before this video explained everything clearly, and you filed it under people I know, did any part of it land somewhere more uncomfortable than that? The truth is, this isn't a rare pattern. It's not a clinical aberration. It exists on a spectrum, and most of us are somewhere on it. The question isn't whether you have any of this. It's where, how much, and whether you've looked at it honestly. Where in your life are you performing confidence rather than actually feeling it? Where are you speaking first, not because you have something to say, but because silence feels like losing ground? Where are you filling space, because space might reveal something? Where are you louder in the room, because quiet feels like disappearing? These aren't accusations, they're calibrations. The path out of this pattern isn't through a better performance. It's through something much harder and much less visible. It's learning to tolerate being seen without the armor on. Learning that the discomfort of a moment of uncertainty won't actually destroy you. Learning to receive feedback, feel the sting of it, and still have a self intact on the other side. It's learning, slowly, that your worth doesn't live in the last thing you said, or in whether the right person noticed you. That's not an insight. That's a practice, repeated across years, usually with help. But it's the only direction that leads somewhere genuinely different. Let me close the loop on this. Real confidence is quieter than culture has taught you to expect. It's sitting in a room full of smart people and not needing to be the smartest, not as a discipline, not because you're practicing humility, but because your worth simply isn't up for a vote. It's getting challenged and pausing, a real pause, not a tactical one, and actually considering whether the other person might be right. It's saying I don't know without your chest tightening. It's being wrong without the version of you that matters coming apart. It's not performing for rooms, not because you don't care what people think, but because what you think is load-bearing in a way that doesn't require constant external reinforcement. None of that is loud. None of it photographs well. In most rooms, it doesn't even get noticed, because we are so trained to notice the performance that we've nearly lost the ability to see what the real thing looks like. But here's what it feels like from the inside. It feels like rest. Not complacency. Not indifference. Not the absence of ambition. The ground under your feet is solid. Not because everything is going well. Not because no one is challenging you. But because the ground doesn't move based on whether you won the last exchange. That's it. That is the whole thing. Not louder, not more certain, not more impressive. Just solid. Internally. Regardless. So here's what to take from this. The loudest person in the room isn't the most grounded. The person who never appears to doubt themselves has often just built stronger defenses against doubt. And the person you've been measuring yourself against, the one who made you ask what they have that I don't, is very likely fighting harder than you know to keep an image intact, one they built because they once didn't believe they were enough without it. That doesn't mean you excuse the behavior when it harms you. It means you stop reading the performance as the person, stop measuring yourself against a defense mechanism, and calling it a standard. And then, honestly, privately, ask yourself where you do the same thing. Because that question, uncomfortable as it is the beginning of the only kind of confidence that doesn't need an audience. If something in this landed differently than you expected, subscribe. This is the conversation we keep having here.